Why isn't my dad a billionaire? Why am I so handsome? Well, that means you're going to lose your hair. You two are so ugly you won't lose your hair.
Ha 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 ha.
In 1999, at the Mrs. Washington International Beauty Pageant, the winner, Carly Krachik, did something that made everyone's jaw drop. Swaying her gorgeous figure, she confidently walked to the center of the stage. Everyone thought she was about to strike a pose, but nobody expected her to take off her wig. Surprise! America's pageant queen was bald. A blonde bombshell, a bald babe with luscious waves, or a beauty in black stockings out of these types. Tell me loud and clear, which one is your favorite? I'm sure the answer is a no-brainer. Hair, since ancient times, has had more than just a physical function. Its greater influence lies in its symbolic meaning in society and culture. And in modern society, hair often represents our state of mind, our personal style, and even our sex appeal. A full, healthy head of hair often sends signals of good health, strong charisma, and virility. Speaking of which, for some reason this reminds me of a rumor about Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang and the lasting impression Princess An King left on her husband. Turns out hair is that important. It's no wonder, then, that male hair loss has become one of the most frustrating conditions. In the search for its cause, back in 1942, a Professor Hamilton completed an experiment that, by today's medical ethics, would never be approved, because he had to find men who had been castrated. In the end, he managed to find 104 of them. And then something amazing happened. And then something amazing happened. And then something amazing happened. Before we dive in, we've got to ask for a little favor. Your likes and follows are incredibly important to us. They're a huge part of what determines whether or not we can continue making more content. Thanks, everyone. Let's rewind the clock a little bit. About 400 million years ago, primitive fish in the water finally mustered up the courage and took a crucial step in the process of evolution, leaving the ocean to set foot on dry land. And this meant that their skin had to undergo drastic changes to adapt to a completely new environment. For example, for insulation and waterproofing, blocking UV rays and so on. Based on morphological and molecular records, it's inferred that mammals and reptiles most likely share a common ancestor, a group of creatures known as pelycosaurs. A very popular hypothesis right now is that hair evolved from the scales of pelycosaurs. The evidence for this is that on the tails of most rodents, there are tiny hairs where the scales connect. Another hypothesis suggests that hair grew out of glands. It was needed to carry glandular secretions to the skin's surface to prevent moisture loss from the body. A third hypothesis states that hair may have evolved from a type of hair-like sensory organ on the surface of the skin. These organs originally served as a warning, helping creatures notice dangerous surroundings. So if hair was so important, then why don't we today have thick body hair? Without a doubt, in hot weather, early humans covered in thick fur would get heat stroke after walking continuously for just 10 to 20 minutes. That's because they couldn't cool down quickly enough. Our ancestors needed to go out and hunt during the day to survive, so they needed a better cooling mechanism. Our ancestors needed to go out and hunt during the day to survive, so they needed a better cooling mechanism. But because this high efficiency in humans relies on the brain, and the brain is extremely sensitive to temperature. Therefore, for humans to continue functioning so efficiently, we had to solve the problem of cooling down. Naturally, thick body hair was the first thing that had to go. And in order to be able to cool down, even when the outside temperature was higher than our own body temperature, early humans gradually evolved sweat glands, using sweat to control their body temperature. Of course, regarding the reason why early humans lost their body hair, Darwin once proposed a rather simple idea. He said that men also preferred women with no body hair, because having no body hair looked sexier. Which probably isn't too different from your own preferences, right? And based on this sexual selection, it gradually led to both men and women losing their thick hair. In any case, as time went on, those small, sparse hair follicles evolved in different directions. And so, all sorts of different follicles and hair types came into being, and this hair would go on to have a huge impact on us today. The main component of hair is keratin. A complete strand of hair looks like a thin cylinder, wider at the root and slender at the tip. It's made up of 3 parts: the hair shaft, the hair root, and the hair follicle. The part sticking out from the skin is the hair shaft, and the part underneath the skin is the hair root. It's wrapped inside the hair follicle, where there's also a sebaceous gland. The sebum it secretes helps to moisturize and protect the hair and scalp, making hair shiny and elastic. The fatty acids in the sebum can also stop microorganisms from multiplying on your head. The part sticking out from the skin is the hair shaft. The part underneath the skin is the hair root. It's wrapped inside the hair follicle, where there's also a sebaceous gland. The sebum it secretes helps to moisturize and protect the hair and scalp, making hair shiny and elastic. The fatty acids in the sebum can also stop microorganisms from multiplying on your head. The fatty acids in the sebum can also stop microorganisms from multiplying on your head. It can stop microorganisms from multiplying on your head and can neutralize some alkaline substances on the scalp. But if too much is secreted, it'll make your hair greasy. And if too little is secreted, it'll make your hair dry. Now, according to current research, we know that the number of hair follicles on a person's scalp is fixed from the moment they're born. It's just that, aside from the hair on our heads and our eyebrows, the rest are hard to see. The human scalp will eventually grow about 100,000 to 150,000 hair follicles, while the rest of the body will grow 3 to 5 million. Different types of hair have different functions. Eyelashes are usually short and tough, and they curl outwards to help keep foreign objects out of your eyes. The hair in your armpits and pubic area is short and curly, which reduces friction between the skin and releases odors. This helps you curb your impulses, unless you're into that sort of thing. The most important hair on your head is typically for insulation, blocking UV rays and so on. A person generally doesn't grow any new hair follicles during their lifetime. There's an interesting study that suggests that the brain under the scalp seems to influence the position of the hair follicles. The spiral pattern of your hair, known as a hair whorl, can be clockwise, counterclockwise, or even a combination of both. Does this suddenly remind you of your childhood, when some mysterious master read your fortune by looking at your hair whorl? Well, actually, your hair whorl really can tell you something. Clinicians have discovered that the direction of the hair whorl can reflect a person's handedness. Among right-handed people, over 90% have a clockwise hair whorl. But as for non-right-handed people, including lefties and ambidextrous people, there's no such pattern. You all can go ahead and check, because I'm a lefty. I've tried. I really can't see the top or the back of my own head. In 1926, a skilled user of the light microscope, Professor Francis Dry, began a project at Massey University to map out the changes in the structure of hair follicles during their growth cycle. He believed that over time, hair follicles undergo fundamentally predictable changes in shape. These changes are similar to the cyclical phases of the moon. He named each stage the anagen phase, the telogen phase, the exogen phase, and the catagen phase. These 4 phases happen to form a closed loop, which describes how hair goes through its changes in a repeating cycle. Professor Dry called the stage where the follicle forms a new hair shaft the anagen phase. During this stage, the hair follicle is embedded deep in the skin, and the cells at its base divide rapidly. As new cells are produced at the bottom, the hair shaft grows upward and emerges from the surface of the body. And the growth cycles for different hairs are different, because the growth cycle for the hair on your head is quite long, about 3 to 7 years, and can even go up to 25 years. Having waist-long hair isn't just a dream. But the anagen phase for eyelashes is only 30 days, which is why they usually don't grow very long. When the hair shaft reaches a certain length, determined by your genes, the hair shaft stops growing and the follicle begins to shorten. Dry called this follicle shrinking stage, the catagen phase. But the catagen phase for the follicle is super short, lasting only a few days. At this point, the follicle enters a dormant stage. Professor Dry called this phase the telogen phase. During this period, the cells don't grow or divide. The follicle reaches its shortest length, while the hair shaft is at its longest model, and the hair is at its most stable and strongest. The 4th stage of the hair growth cycle is the shedding stage, known as the exogen phase. During this stage, the hair's connection loosens, and the hair shaft falls out. Generally speaking, hair growth and shedding are primarily controlled by the hair's own growth cycle, but it's also affected by other factors like endocrine disorders, mental state, nutrition, and genetics. And if there's an abnormality in any of these factors, it can very likely lead to abnormal hair loss. First, let's look at how the endocrine system affects hair loss. Under normal circumstances, the body's endocrine functions can directly or indirectly affect the condition of our hair. You see, it's not just nerves surrounding the hair follicle. The skin where it's located is filled with all sorts of endocrine hormones. These hormones come from endocrine organs, like the pituitary gland at the base of the brain, the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys, and the thyroid gland attached to the trachea in your neck. The hormones produced by these organs all affect hair follicle growth in their own unique ways, and follicles in different parts of the body have different levels of sensitivity to different hormones. An 18th century condition known as parlor disease was actually caused by hypothyroidism, which caused patients to move slowly, suffer from intellectual disabilities, and lose hair from their scalp, armpits, and pubic area. Therefore, an abnormality in thyroid hormones is bound to have a major impact on hair health. Now, this next hormone is probably the one you're most interested in. So how does it affect people's hair? Androgens are present in the blood of both men and women, but the concentration is higher in men. Hair follicles in different parts of the body react to sex hormones in different ways. For example, the hair follicles on the sides of your head don't react to sex hormones at all, but the hair on the top of your head is highly sensitive to male hormones. Isn't that wild? The hair on the very same head can be so different. This is why when hair loss happens, you get that classic bald spot on top. The hair follicles in your armpits and pubic area are even more sensitive to hormones. Even at very low concentrations, they'll start to grow. That's why I really don't get the saying that thick eyebrows mean a stronger sex drive. And this is why when you start going through puberty, you start growing hair down there. As long as men exist, it seems that male hair loss caused by androgens isn't going anywhere. We generally call this condition androgenic alopecia, also known as male pattern baldness. Male pattern baldness starts at the temples on both sides of the forehead. The hair gradually becomes finer and softer, thinning out and falling out. Over time, the hair loss will extend inwards. After several years or even decades, the hair on the upper forehead and the crown can be completely gone, causing the hairline to recede from both sides. But the hair on the back and sides of the head can remain normal. Some patients also start losing hair from the crown of their head. Male pattern baldness can also be seen in adult women, showing up as thinning hair on the top of the head, but their frontal hairline doesn't recede. According to the latest data from our country, the prevalence of male hair loss in our country is 20%. In other words, basically 1 out of every 5 men is struggling with hair loss. I was intentionally looking out for it when I was on the street today, and I have to say you really do see it a lot. This condition usually appears in one's 30s or 40s, but it can also occur after reaching sexual maturity during puberty. This is a disease with a very strong genetic link. According to statistics among men with male pattern baldness, over 53% have a family history of the condition. And the risk of paternal inheritance is significantly higher than maternal inheritance. It's classified as a polygenic hereditary disease. Its genetic traits only manifest under the influence of androgens. The reason why androgens cause hair loss in men puzzled scientists for a very long time. Even in the early 20th century, when they finally figured out the role hormones play in diseases, they discovered another problem. There were no animal models available for studying human hair loss. This meant they had to use human patients as their research subjects. The ideal patient would be a man with extremely low androgen secretion. But finding such patients wasn't easy. However, in 1942, things took a turn. At that time, a professor of anatomy at Yale University School of Medicine, James Hamilton, was very interested in male pattern baldness. And somehow, he managed to find 104 castrated men. These men all had very low concentrations of androgens in their blood. Some of them had been castrated even before puberty. As for the reason why, rumor has it they always watched videos without ever hitting the like button. The good news was, this group didn't have mature male characteristics. They had very little body hair, no beards, and their sexual organs were undeveloped. And most importantly, they weren't bald. After these men were injected with androgens, not only did they gain the symbols of a mature man, but even more delightfully, those with a family history of baldness also began to lose their hair. This study, right? It perfectly illustrates the conditions that must be met for hair loss to occur. First, androgens or male hormones are a necessary condition for hair loss. Second, there must be a genetic factor. At the same time, Hamilton also pointed out something very interesting. For men who were castrated after they had already started losing their hair, even if their androgen levels were lowered or they were even castrated, the hair loss would not stop. The struggle is real. But Hamilton didn't stop there. In 1951, he proposed a classification system for male pattern baldness. This is what we often refer to today as the Hamilton scale. Male hair loss patterns, and can be categorized into 7 stages, and these patterns are indeed very consistent. For androgenic alopecia in women, Ludwig in 1977 proposed the Ludwig scale. It includes a total of 3 patterns. Now we know the reason androgenic alopecia happens is because in these patients, within the scalp of the balding areas, there's a substance called dihydrotestosterone. Its concentration is significantly higher than in normal people. This androgen metabolite can shorten the hair's growth cycle, cause the hair follicles in the scalp to degenerate and shrink, and make the hair become thinner, softer, and fall out. Further research found that there's also an enzyme in the body called 5-alpha reductase. It can convert testosterone into dihydrotestosterone, and in people with androgenic alopecia, especially within their scalp, the activity of this enzyme is particularly high, although androgens are also extremely important for the growth of body hair in women, because under normal circumstances, their levels are relatively low. That's why women generally don't have very thick body hair. But if an adult woman has high androgen levels, she might develop conditions like hirsutism or even male pattern baldness. Next, let's talk about diseases, especially the impact of autoimmune diseases on hair loss. Some people wake up in the morning and suddenly discover that a patch of hair has vanished from their brilliant head. It's super scary. To make this phenomenon easier to grasp, people came up with a folk name that's easy to understand: ghost shave. Medically, it's actually called alopecia areata. It usually presents as sudden oval or round patches of hair loss. It can happen to both men and women, and the patches can vary in size and number. The skin in the hair loss area looks normal, with no signs of inflammation. Before it happens, the patient usually doesn't feel any discomfort at all. The outcome of alopecia areata can vary. It can progress further, with patches merging into larger ones, even affecting the entire scalp and lasting for months. However, most patients can gradually recover on their own, but it can also recur, or sometimes hair falls out in one area while growing back in another. An abnormal immune system can lead to many diseases, like lupus nephritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and so on. Alopecia areata is essentially a T-cell-mediated autoimmune disease. In the pathogenesis of alopecia areata, the cell-mediated immune process plays a key role. Damage to matrix cells in the upper part of the dermal papilla stimulates an autoimmune process, causing the immune system to mistakenly attack its own hair follicles. This attack disrupts the normal growth cycle of the hair follicles, ultimately leading to hair loss. But some studies also show the link between alopecia areata and genetics. Studies show that about 10 to 20% of alopecia areata cases have a family history. There have been reports of identical twins developing alopecia areata in the same spot at the same time. There was even a case of a family having it for 4 generations. So this also shows that alopecia areata can be influenced by genetics. So what about stress-induced hair loss? This is often caused by excessive mental stress, which leads to increased hair loss. Under the effect of mental stress, the body's erector pili muscles contract, making your hair stand on end. The hair follicles and the micro blood vessels in the dermal papilla constrict intensely and for a long time. This causes a local circulatory disorder, which further leads to changes in the hair's ecosystem and malnutrition. As a result, the hair enters the resting phase and hair loss occurs. Besides that, there are many other causes of hair loss. For example, malnutrition, medication, and other factors can all cause varying degrees of hair loss. We won't go into too much detail here. So the question is, how can you tell if your hair loss is normal or not? A quick and easy method is to grab 10 to 20 strands of hair and pull down slowly but firmly. Normally 2 to 3 strands will fall out. If more than 6 strands come out, there might be a problem. If the hair loss is due to recent high stress or nutritional issues, then it can usually be greatly improved through lifestyle adjustments, supplementing your diet, and increasing exercise. If you notice your hair getting thinner and thinner, you should see a doctor right away. Currently, the internationally used classification system for male pattern baldness is the Hamilton-Norwood scale. It's divided into 7 levels and 12 types of hair loss. Among them, levels 1 to 5 are considered mild to moderate hair loss. Since the hair follicles haven't completely shrunk, there's still hope. Anything above a level 6 is considered severe hair loss. Most of the hair follicles have already shrunk, and hope is slim. Male pattern baldness is most common in men in their 30s and 40s, but it can start as early as 17. If it's not treated in time, the hair loss will get worse, and it'll become much harder to treat. Generally speaking, treating hair loss takes a long time. So if anyone tells you they can cure your hair loss in a month, that person is 99.9% a scammer. For example, with finasteride, which is currently used to treat androgenetic alopecia. You have to be on the medication for at least 6 months before you can even start growing hair, and over a year to see the full effect. Finasteride is an androgen blocker, which is essentially a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. The way it works is, it blocks the peripheral conversion of testosterone into dihydrotestosterone or DHT, which significantly lowers its concentration in your blood serum and tissues. This reduces its impact on the hair growth cycle. The main side effects of taking finasteride are that some patients might experience a lower sex drive, erectile dysfunction, reduced ejaculation, testicular pain, and allergic reactions. Besides oral medications, there's a topical treatment everyone's curious about: Minoxidil. Is it a total scam? Well, first of all, it was the first drug clinically approved by the US FDA to promote hair growth. But the origin story of Minoxidil is actually pretty dramatic. Minoxidil was originally developed as a new oral medication to treat high blood pressure. But as it turned out, its effect on blood pressure, I can't say it was completely useless, but it was pretty much negligible. Not only was it not very effective, it was also a real heartbreaker. And I mean that in a physical sense, and was gradually replaced by other drugs. So its original purpose was slowly abandoned. Fortunately, during the clinical use of Minoxidil for treating high blood pressure, some unexpected discoveries were made. And this discovery, well, it allowed the drug to fully tap into a desperate user need, rapidly pivot its value proposition, and forge a deep bond with hair loss sufferers, thus empowering them. Back then, after patients took minoxidil in clinical settings, doctors noticed some of them were experiencing hypertrichosis or excessive hair growth, and it was a pretty consistent pattern. In some patients who also had androgenetic alopecia, their high blood pressure didn't improve, but their hair loss symptoms actually got better. Although it was abandoned by cardiologists, minoxidil found a new home in dermatology, where it discovered a new purpose. Later, after several major clinical trials, it was found that minoxidil did indeed have a significant effect on promoting hair growth. It worked for both androgen-dependent and non-androgen-dependent hair loss. It was effective for both. As for the science behind how minoxidil works, minoxidil sulfate is the active metabolite that stimulates hair growth. It works by dilating the small blood vessels, improving blood circulation in the scalp. This delivers more oxygen and nutrients to the hair follicles, which helps slow down the hair loss process and promotes hair growth. At the same time, minoxidil can also increase the permeability of potassium ions, preventing calcium ions from entering the cells. As a result, in the cytoplasm, the concentration of free calcium ions decreases, and when calcium ions are present, epidermal growth factor actually inhibits hair growth. Because taking minoxidil orally can cause systemic side effects, and since hair loss doesn't really affect your overall health, topical minoxidil became the preferred treatment for hair loss. After numerous experiments and adjustments, 2 concentrations of minoxidil solution were finalized, 2% and 5%. So people made it into a topical formulation, which greatly improved its safety. Topical minoxidil formulations are mainly at a 5% concentration. The most common side effects of topical minoxidil, since it is a local topical medication, are the common adverse reactions you might expect, like itching where it's applied, flaking, and so on. For children, women, and the elderly, its safety profile is also a bit better compared to finasteride. Multiple clinical trials have confirmed that, for patients with moderate to severe androgenetic alopecia on the crown of their head, after 48 weeks of treatment with 5% minoxidil, the hair growth count in the 5% minoxidil group was 5 times higher than in the placebo group. The conclusion is that topical minoxidil in promoting hair growth, its effectiveness in growing hair is higher than both the placebo group and the untreated group. But it's important to note that a complete treatment cycle with minoxidil usually takes half a year or even longer. Its usage and dosage must also be strictly followed according to the instructions or your doctor's advice. Some patients will continue to lose hair after stopping the medication, so they need to continue using it to maintain the results. Furthermore, whether or not minoxidil will actually work also depends on the condition of your individual hair follicles. If your hair follicles have already atrophied, forget minoxidil. Not even a miracle worker could help you. Now, about this thing people often talk about when using minoxidil, the dread shed that occurs afterward, refers to the phenomenon where after starting minoxidil, hair that was in its resting phase suddenly starts to fall out. This might cause patients to panic and curse it as a scam. In reality, this is because minoxidil has started to affect the hair follicle's growth cycle, causing the hair that was originally in the resting phase to fall out early to prepare for new growth. The occurrence of this shedding phase varies from person to person. For some people, this won't happen. For others, it might last anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. As time goes on, new hair will still grow out. The density of your hair will also increase. If you respond well to minoxidil, then after using it for 3 months, you should be able to see some results. If you're really worried, there's no harm in consulting a professional doctor. Another option, of course, is a hair transplant. It's currently one of the available treatments for hair loss, and it's the most direct surgical method. A hair transplant is done using special instruments to completely remove the hair follicle along with some of the surrounding tissue. It's cut out and then transplanted to an area that needs hair and is in a suitable condition to receive it. There's a limit to the number of hairs that can be transplanted at one time because the incision in the donor area can't be too large. Otherwise, it will cause scarring, and it just won't be worth it. Usually, one transplant session isn't enough to achieve a satisfactory result. Generally, you'll need at least 2 to 3 sessions to get the effect you want, and the price can be quite high. But essentially, it's still just treating the symptom. If the underlying cause of your hair loss isn't addressed, you'll just continue to lose hair later on. That's something everyone needs to keep in mind. All things considered, when you compare the safety and cost, minoxidil is the best option. As for me, I recently came across a topical minoxidil solution, Mandy Minoxidil Tincture. Their product uses a 5% concentration formula. It was approved for the market in 2001 by China's National Medical Products Administration. It was the first product approved for the market in the country as an over-the-counter drug for treating hair loss and alopecia areata. In 2022, in a well-known media company's ranking of all medicines on the web, Mandy was ranked number 2. Its sales figures are also among the best. For Mandy, among all mobile pharmaceutical sales online, To achieve this kind of result is honestly pretty surprising. At the same time, Mandy is also the Hangzhou Asian Games Organizing Committee's officially designated sponsor. This is because considering the differences in hair follicles among ethnic groups, for example, the rate of male pattern baldness in North America is over 50%, while in our country it's around 20%. So Mandy is actually a better fit for the scalp of people like us. It also comes with tools like a measured dropper, a precision brush, and a massage roller ball, which makes it much more convenient to use. Minoxidil effectively improves microcirculation in the hair follicles, prevents hair loss, and promotes hair growth. However, the effectiveness of minoxidil is heavily influenced by its manufacturing process. Mandy uses the latest innovative technology for minoxidil currently on the market. This is thanks to a patent they applied for in 2018 for a topical composition containing minoxidil and its preparation method. This patent was published in 2021. This PBS technology makes storage incredibly convenient for users. You can just keep it at room temperature, unlike other formulas that require cold storage. To address the problem of minoxidil easily evaporating and losing its potency, the effective organic solvent produced by the PBS process allows Mandy's minoxidil, even when exposed to air on the scalp, to maintain its purity and effectiveness. Objectively, this leads to better absorption by the scalp and allows the medicinal effects to last longer. Anyway, after asking friends around me and looking into the relevant research, if you're someone who's looking for more hair volume, you might want to give it a try. A classic brand that's sold over 22 million bottles. And to wrap things up, I want to share something with you all. While I was doing my research, I came across a really interesting little story. As we all know, before modern medicine came along, medicine and theology were one and the same. The basic principle behind how doctors treated diseases was to use various methods to expel evil spirits, like chanting spells, bloodletting, shaving heads, trepanning using all sorts of incense, and so on. Among these methods, cutting hair was just as important as bloodletting, and both were considered specialized skills for doctors. So doctors were also barbers. This profession was all the rage in medieval Europe, and it even received royal approval. In 1462, they established the first Barbers' Guild, granting guild members in London a monopoly on both hairdressing and surgery. However, outside of this king-approved guild, another group emerged. They also called themselves surgeons, and this group of people were perhaps closer to our modern-day surgeons. They weren't afraid of royal authority, relying on their solid knowledge of anatomy to perform more radical surgeries. Even in the year 1514, there were only 11 of them, and they named themselves the Fellowship of Surgeons. Since they were competing for the same patients, the conflict between these two groups started to grow. More and more people also began to realize that cutting hair and operating on the body were two different things. For historical reasons, the barber surgeons' precision and results in surgery weren't all that great. In contrast, the specialized surgeons, with their superior skills, gradually won over this market and the people's respect. This worsening conflict led to the barber surgeons and the pure surgeons in 1745 going their separate ways for good. Surgeons founded the Company of Surgeons. In 1800, it was renamed the Royal College of Surgeons, but the barbers weren't to be outdone. They established the Company of Barbers, which later evolved into a series of salons like Style World, the Hair House, and so on. Today, the only remaining trace of the connection between barbers and surgeons is probably the spinning pole outside the barbershop. Surprising, right? It used to represent the very common practice of bloodletting. And then there's today's medical journal, the Lancet. A lancet was the surgical knife used for bloodletting. This just goes to show how influential bloodletting was back in the day. To perform a bloodletting, the barber surgeon would cut a vein in the patient's arm and then wrap the arm with a white bandage. During this process, the patient would grit their teeth and tightly grip a pole. When not in use, the barber surgeon would wrap clean white bandages around the pole and place it outside the shop as a sign that they offered bloodletting services. Later on, people stopped using real poles and bandages. Instead, they were replaced by painted poles, modeled after the real thing. Sometimes the pole would be painted red and white, representing the artery and the bandage. Other times it would be painted red, white and blue, representing the artery, the vein, and the bandage respectively. Even today, when we walk down the street, we can still see those spinning poles outside many barbershops. It's a symbol of the barbershop and also a sign that Tony, the stylist, is ready for his next client. All right, that's all for this video. If you liked our video, remember to follow me. I'm your host, Jun Cheng. See you next time.